My name is Sophia Hartfield, 32 years old, and at that moment I was digging through a dumpster behind a boarded-up mansion when a woman in an immaculate designer suit appeared. She stopped a few feet away and asked, "Are you Sophia Hartfield?" I froze, clutching a broken antique chair leg, my hands coated in grime, while my ex-husband's cruel words from 3 months earlier echoed in my head. "No one wants a penniless, homeless woman like you." I'd laughed back then, but now, standing knee-deep in discarded furniture, I could almost hear him again, mocking me for scavenging treasures at sunrise. I pulled myself out of the dumpster and brushed the filth from my jeans. "That's me," I said. "If you're here to collect payment, all I've got is this chair leg." Her lips curved slightly. "I'm Victoria Chen, attorney for the estate of Theodore Hartfield." My chest tightened. Uncle Theodore, the man who took me in after my parents' accident, who nurtured my passion for architecture, and who turned his back on me when I chose love over my career a decade ago. "Your great-uncle passed 6 weeks ago," Victoria continued evenly. "He named you sole beneficiary of his entire estate." My world went still. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're tuning in from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever hit rock bottom just before life handed you something unbelievable. You'll want to hear how this story unfolds. Only 3 months earlier, I'd still been comfortably middle class. I had a husband, a home, and an unused architecture degree. Richard, my ex, insisted I didn't need to work. "I earn enough for both of us," he'd say, not out of love, but control. When I found out about his affair with his secretary, everything collapsed overnight. The divorce was vicious. Richard had the best attorney's money could buy. I had legal aid and desperation. He walked away with the house, the cars, and the savings. I walked away with a single suitcase and the bitter truth that our prenup left me nothing. His last words still stung. "Good luck finding someone who wants broken leftovers." Since then, I'd survived by salvaging abandoned furniture, restoring it in a rented storage unit, and selling what I could online. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival, my kind of dignity. Victoria motioned toward a sleek black Mercedes. "Perhaps we can continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable." I stared at my dirt-streaked reflection in the car window. "I'm not exactly dressed for that." "You're the heir to a $50 million estate," she replied with quiet certainty. "The car can survive a little dust." 50 million. The words hung in the air like a second heartbeat. The figure barely registered in my mind as I followed her, numb and silent. Inside the car, Victoria handed me a folder while the city blurred past the window. "Your uncle left you his Manhattan home, his Ferrari collection, a portfolio of income properties, and majority ownership of Hartfield Architecture," she said matter-of-factly. "The firm's valuation stands around $47 million. My eyes fixed on the photographs inside, the same brownstone I'd admired years ago in Architectural Digest. The Hartfield estate, Uncle Theodore's greatest creation, 5 stories of intricate Victorian charm fused with clean modern design. "There must be some error," I murmured. "He cut me out of his life a decade ago." Victoria's tone softened. "He never altered his will, Miss Hartfield. You've always been listed as his only heir, but there is one stipulation." "Of course there is," I said with a sigh. "What is it?" "You're required to assume the role of CEO at Hartfield Architecture within 30 days and keep the position for a minimum of 1 year. If you decline or don't meet the condition, the entire inheritance reverts to the American Institute of Architects." A hollow laugh escaped me. "I've never practiced a single day as an architect. Graduated at 21, married at 22. My husband thought my degree was some cute pastime." Victoria's gaze met mine. "Your uncle believed you'd eventually find your way back. This was his way of ensuring that the Mercedes rolled to a halt outside a boutique hotel. You'll spend the night here," she continued. "Tomorrow we fly to New York to meet the board. You have 29 days to decide." I stared down at the folder, photos of the life I'd once dreamed of, the path I'd traded for a marriage that had left me with nothing, the life Uncle Theodore had wanted for me. "I'll do it," I said quietly. "Excellent," Victoria replied with a small smile. "We depart at 8. Pack light. Everything you'll need will be provided." I glanced at the trash bag in the trunk holding the remnants of my life. "Trust me," I muttered. "Traveling light won't be difficult." The hotel room felt surreal, more luxury than I'd seen in months. As I scrubbed away the last traces of dirt from under my nails, my reflection stared back. Gaunt cheeks, tired eyes, tangled hair. This was the aftermath of loving Richard. My thoughts drifted backward to when I was 21, in my final year of architecture school. He had been 32, confident, magnetic, already established. He'd come to my gallery exhibition where my Sustainable Community Center project had taken first place. Uncle Theodore's pride that night had been unmistakable. "You're going to change the world," Uncle Theodore had told me once, his voice full of conviction. "Next year, you'll come work with me at the firm." Together, we'll make history. Richard had overheard that conversation. He'd introduced himself afterward, charming and confident, praising my designs and inviting me to dinner. 6 months later, we were engaged. 2 months after that, married. Uncle Theodore had refused to attend the wedding. "You're making a terrible mistake," he'd warned over the phone. "That man doesn't want an equal. He wants an ornament. You're building yourself a gilded cage." I'd been indignant, naive, and hopelessly infatuated. "You're just envious I'm choosing my own life," I'd snapped. "No," he'd said quietly. "I'm devastated because you're abandoning the future you fought for. But you're grown. It's your choice to ruin." After that, silence. No returned calls, no answers to my holiday cards. Even on his 80th birthday, he wouldn't speak to me. Not when I needed him most. From the start, Richard's control had crept in slowly. First, he suggested I take a break before job hunting. Then he questioned why I'd bother with the licensing exam. "You don't need that kind of stress," he'd say. When I began doing small freelance projects, home additions for friends, he'd conveniently plan sudden trips, leaving me scrambling until I gave up altogether. My quiet rebellion became late-night study sessions, online courses, architecture journals, recorded lectures while he was away. I filled notebook after notebook with sketches of structures that would never be built, visions destined to stay in ink and imagination. One day, he stumbled upon them. "That's a sweet little pastime," he said with a smirk. "But how about you focus on keeping the house presentable? The Johnsons are coming over tonight." Now, sitting in the hotel room, I ordered room service, the first proper meal I'd had in days, and opened my laptop. Searching Hartfield architecture, I found a sleek website showcasing breathtaking projects across continents, galleries, hotels, and landmarks, each one stamped with my uncle's unmistakable genius. A photograph caught my attention. Theodore Hartfield, silver-haired, poised in front of the Seattle Museum of Modern Art. The caption noted he was survived by no children and preceded in death by his wife, Eleanor. But once upon a time, I had been like a daughter to him. When my parents died in a car crash at 15, it was Uncle Theodore who'd taken me in and given me a home. He had been the one who first nurtured my fascination with design. Uncle Theodore used to take me to construction sites, pointing out how every structure had its own rhythm, its own pulse. To him, architecture wasn't just about walls and beams, it was about giving life form. He funded my education, praised my imagination, and told anyone who would listen that I was destined to create beauty. And I'd thrown that faith away for a man who never even cared enough to ask what my thesis had been about. My phone buzzed. A message from Victoria. "Car arrives at 8 a.m. Bring everything you own. You won't be coming back." I looked at the garbage bag in the corner. One suitcase of worn clothes, a laptop, and 17 notebooks filled with a decade of sketches and ideas. That was my entire existence packed into a few pounds of memory. That night, I leafed through the notebooks. The early pages mimicked my uncle's style, all precision and tradition. But as the years went on, I saw traces of something new, my own voice emerging, a harmony of sustainable function and classical form, modern yet eternal. Richard's dismissive words no longer mattered, perhaps they never truly had. At 8 sharp, I stood in the lobby, garbage bag at my feet, head held high. Victoria was already seated in the car when I slid in beside her. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Better than I have in months," I replied. "So what's the plan in New York?" "First, the Hartfield residence," she said. "Then the board meeting at 2. They expect you to walk away. Several members are already maneuvering to carve up the company. Why would they assume I'd quit?" Victoria's lips curved slightly. "You've never practiced." "Most people would be terrified." "Well," I said, meeting her gaze, "I'm not most people. And for the record, I know architecture inside and out. I just never had the chance to prove it." As we boarded a private jet, the absurdity hit me. Yesterday, I was scavenging trash. Today, I was flying first class to Manhattan. Tomorrow, I'd be running a multi-million-dollar firm. The universe certainly had a dark sense of humor. When the plane began its descent, the Manhattan skyline glittered beneath the clouds, sharp and endless. I'd never been here before. Richard hated big cities, preferred the manicured quiet of suburbia where everything stayed under his thumb. The car weaved through bustling streets that had only existed for me in films before turning onto a serene block lined with trees. And there it was, the Hartfield estate, a 5-story brownstone that commanded attention, yet somehow felt warm, familiar. The original Victorian facade gleamed with subtle modern upgrades, solar tiles cleverly hidden in the roofline, windows of adaptive smart glass reflecting the morning light. The gardens looked immaculate, every hedge perfectly trimmed, every flower bed glowing with quiet precision. "Welcome home," Victoria said softly. "Have you ever felt your entire life hinge on one fragile inhale? If you have, leave a comment below, because even now, years later, I still can't fully describe the weight of that moment." A woman in her 60s greeted me at the front door with a warm, familiar smile. "Ms. Hartfield, I'm Margaret. I worked for your uncle for 3 decades, she said, hesitating. "I also cared for you after your parents passed. You might not remember much. You were so young and so heartbroken, but I've never forgotten you." Her words stirred something distant in me, the comforting figure who'd made sure I ate when grief hollowed me out, who'd quietly found me crying in my uncle's study. "Margaret," I whispered, wrapping her in an embrace. "Thank you for everything." "Welcome home, dear girl," she said, her voice thick with affection. "Your uncle always believed you'd return someday." Inside, the house was a masterpiece. Ornate crown molding blended seamlessly with modern simplicity, every surface intentional, every detail breathing design. Art filled the walls, furniture balanced elegance and comfort, the space itself a living expression of what architecture could aspire to be. "Your uncle's suite is on the 4th floor," Margaret said as she led me up the grand staircase. "But the 5th, he remodeled that for you." I stopped mid-step. "For me? When?" "8 years ago," she said quietly. 8 years. We hadn't spoken in a decade. Margaret's smile was tinged with sadness. "He never stopped believing you'd come back. Said you were too gifted to stay hidden forever. He wanted your workspace ready for the day you returned." The studio took my breath away. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. Drafting tables stretched across the room. Computers, sketching tools, and drafting supplies filled every corner. And pinned on the far wall, my old college exhibition sketch. My throat tightened as I traced the worn edges of the paper. He'd kept it all this time. "He was very proud of you," Margaret said softly. "He used to say your gift was sleeping, not gone. That one day you'd wake it up again." Victoria appeared at the door. "The board meeting's in an hour." "Would you like to change? Margaret had clothing brought in for you." In the adjoining room, the closet was stocked with crisp professional suits, tailored and timeless. I slipped into a navy ensemble that made me stand taller, feel sharper, like the version of myself I might have been if life hadn't derailed. When I came downstairs, a man in his late 30s stood beside Victoria. He was tall, his dark hair dusted with early gray, his expression kind but measuring, as if he were already trying to decide what kind of leader I might be. "Sophia Hartfield," the man said, extending a confident hand. "Jacob Sterling, senior partner at Hartfield Architecture. I worked alongside your uncle for 12 years. I blinked. "The Jacob Sterling? You led the Seattle Public Library expansion." His brows lifted, a hint of surprise in his calm expression. "You're familiar with it?" "I study architecture constantly," I said. "Your design used biophilic integration most architects overlook. It was exceptional work." Something shifted behind his eyes, respect replacing formality. "Then you're not just Theodore's sentimental appointment." "Good, because the board won't go easy on you." "Jacob," Victoria cautioned, but I shook my head. "He's right. They expect me to crash and burn." My uncle knew that. Jacob smiled faintly. "Theodore told me you were brilliant but broken. Said the moment you walked into that boardroom, we'd see whether the spark in you had survived." I thought of Richard, of scavenging behind mansions, of my uncle keeping a studio ready all those years. I met Jacob's gaze. "Then let's give them a show." Hartfield Architecture occupied 3 sleek floors in Midtown Manhattan. The moment we stepped in, conversations hushed. Eyes followed me. Inside the glass-walled conference room, 8 board members sat around a polished table, their faces tight with skepticism. "Everyone," Victoria began, "this is Sophia Hartfield, Theodore Hartfield's great-niece and the new CEO of the firm." A man in his 50s leaned back with open disdain. "With all due respect, Miss Hartfield has 0 experience in practice. Clearly, Theodore's judgment had declined." "Actually, Mr. Carmichael," I said evenly, "my uncle understood this firm needed renewal, not more nostalgia from people protecting their comfort zones." I placed one of my notebooks on the table and opened it. "This is a concept for a sustainable mixed-use project I designed 3 years ago. Rain gardens, green roofs, passive solar flow. I have 16 more volumes like this. 10 years of design work done quietly because my husband called architecture a hobby." Carmichael flipped through the pages, unimpressed, but several others leaned closer, curiosity flickering in their eyes. A woman near the end of the table finally spoke. "Even with talent, running this company takes leadership, business strategy, client trust. Design alone won't cut it." "You're absolutely right," I said without hesitation. "That's why I'll depend on the expertise already here, especially Jacob's. I'm not claiming to know everything. I'm here to learn, to lead, and to carry forward my uncle's legacy while innovating for the future." I looked around the room, meeting each skeptical stare. "If anyone here prefers staying stagnant instead of evolving, the door is open. This firm was built on vision, and that's exactly what I intend to restore." Victoria opened a leather folder and began distributing documents across the table. "Anyone wishing to remain with the company will sign updated contracts," she said calmly. "Those choosing to leave will receive severance. You have until the close of business today." Chairs scraped back as the board members filtered out, some whispering, others glaring. Jacob lingered. "That was impressive," he said. "You've made adversaries of half the board, but the half worth keeping respects you now." I smiled faintly. "And you? Did I just make you an enemy too?" He shook his head. "Theodore told me a year ago that if anything ever happened to him, my job was to help you find your footing. He said you'd been buried alive for too long, and that once you resurfaced, nothing would stop you." I think he was right. I turned toward the window, the Manhattan skyline gleaming like steel in light. He usually was, though he had questionable taste in board members. "Carmichael looks like he snacks on kittens before lunch." Jacob chuckled. "You'll be fine here." The next week felt like diving headfirst into a world I'd once only studied. Jacob stayed close, walking me through blueprints, client meetings, firm dynamics. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. "Your uncle had a distinctive leadership philosophy," Jacob said one afternoon in my new office. Theodore's former space, now carefully preserved. The air still carried a trace of his cologne. His old leather chair sat beside the 1970s drafting table, worn smooth by decades of work. Miniature models of his most iconic buildings lined the shelves. "Let me guess," I said. He was terrifying, Jacob grinned. Demanding, yes. But he believed in freedom. He'd rather see bold failure than safe mediocrity. Excellence or nothing, that was exactly how he taught me when I was young. Push boundaries. Never settle. Then my computer pinged. An all-staff email. Carmichael's name in bold. Effective immediately. All design decisions require board approval prior to client presentation. I stared at the screen. "That's not how my uncle operated," I said. Jacob frowned. "No, Theodore trusted his architects. Carmichael's trying to clip your wings." Without hesitation, I hit reply all. "This policy is declined. Hartfield Architecture thrives on trust in our designer's judgment. As per the company charter, board approval applies only to projects exceeding $10 million. I hit send. Jacob's eyebrows rose. "You just embarrassed him in front of everyone." "Good," I said. "I spent 10 years letting someone else make me doubt myself. That ends today. I was done letting men dictate what I could or couldn't do." So when Carmichael's reply arrived minutes later, demanding a private conversation, I accepted on the condition that Jacob be present. He entered my office with the stiff posture of someone accustomed to authority. "Ms. Hartfield," he began coolly, "my only aim is to safeguard the firm's reputation. By defying procedure and undermining your CEO?" I asked evenly. "Interesting interpretation of loyalty." He straightened, voice hardening. "Your uncle left me 30% ownership. I've dedicated 23 years to this company. I won't stand by while you dismantle it." I leaned back in Theodore's chair, calm but firm. "Then let's be clear. My uncle left me controlling interest. You can collaborate or resist, but if you choose the latter, you'll lose. Take the weekend to decide which option aligns with your future here." When the door closed behind him, Jacob let out a low whistle. "Where did that come from?" I laughed softly, though my hands still trembled. From 3 months of eating out of dumpsters and realizing I'd rather fail on my own than live on someone else's leash. Also, I may have picked up a few lessons from binge-watching Succession. Later that evening, wandering through Theodore's old office, I opened a cabinet marked with his handwriting. Inside were folders labeled with my name, each one corresponding to a different year. I flipped through the contents, my college projects, clippings from architectural journals, even photos from my wedding. My smile in each image faded as the years passed, until only exhaustion remained. The final folder held articles about my divorce, court records that documented every cruel detail. Beneath the papers lay an envelope addressed to me in Theodore's familiar hand. The ink had faded slightly, dated 2 months before his death. "Sophia, if you're reading this, it means you finally came home. I'm sorry I let pride silence me. I should have called, so many times, but I was angry that you'd chosen so poorly. By the time I was ready to forgive, the years had built walls between us. I watched you shrink yourself for a man who never deserved you. I wanted to step in, but Margaret said you had to reach the breaking point on your own. She was right. You had to choose freedom yourself. This company has always been yours. From the moment you were 15, bent over my blueprints, I knew you were the one who'd carry my work forward, not because you're my niece, but because you're extraordinary. In your studio, the bottom right drawer of the filing cabinet holds something for you. Use it well. And Sophia, know that I was always proud of you, even when I was too stubborn to say it." T. Back at the estate, I went straight to the studio. The old filing cabinet sat against the far wall. I felt beneath the bottom drawer until my fingers brushed a key taped to the underside. The lock clicked open, revealing 17 leather portfolios, each one labeled with a different year. Inside the cabinet lay Theodore's raw brilliance. Not the refined blueprints the world admired, but the unfiltered, messy drafts that built them. Page after page showed his real process. Half-erased lines, margin notes, sketches abandoned and reimagined. Each portfolio marked a year of his creative evolution, a living chronicle of persistence and reinvention. In the final folder, a short note rested atop the stack in his familiar, slanted handwriting. "These are my failures, the ideas that didn't work until they did. I'm leaving them to you because every young architect should know that even legends stumble. Use them to teach, to inspire, and to remember that brilliance isn't born complete. It's crafted, one imperfect sketch at a time, just like you're rebuilding yourself now. With love, T." I sat there for a long time, crying quietly over paper that smelled faintly of ink and dust. By dawn, an idea had begun to take shape. When Jacob arrived, I was already sketching furiously across tracing paper. "What are you working on?" he asked. "A mentorship initiative," I said. "The Hartfield Fellowship. We'll recruit architecture students from underrepresented backgrounds and let them study these portfolios. They'll see Theodore's process, his false starts, his breakthroughs. We'll give them paid internships and hands-on experience on real projects." Jacob leaned over my shoulder, scanning the outline. "That's ambitious. Expensive, too. That's the point," I said, meeting his gaze. "This firm should be more than a business. It should build people as much as it builds structures." He smiled faintly. "Theodore would have loved that." Then, quieter, "You're not trying to be him. You're becoming exactly who he believed you could be." I looked up, touched. "Thank you for never treating me like I need to prove I belong here." "You did that on your first day," he said. "Everything since then has just reinforced it." My phone buzzed, cutting through the moment. The number was unfamiliar. The text made my stomach tighten. "Congratulations on the inheritance. Seems like you landed on your feet. We should talk." Richard. He must have read the Architectural Digest feature on my appointment. Typical. I showed the message to Jacob, whose expression hardened instantly. "Want me to take care of this?" I shook my head, a calm detachment settling over me. "No need." "He's irrelevant." I deleted the text, blocked the number, and set the phone aside. Richard had taken enough from me. Now he was nothing more than a footnote, already fading into the past. A footnote in a far better story. That's all Richard had become. My real story was just beginning. The Anderson Project was my first major client pitch as CEO, a Seattle headquarters for a tech billionaire who wanted something revolutionary, sustainable yet iconic, alive yet functional. It was exactly the kind of work Hartfield Architecture was born to do. For 3 relentless weeks, I'd collaborated with our engineers, refining every detail: a living roof system, integrated rainwater capture, adaptive smart glass controlling light and temperature. The design wasn't just environmentally responsible, it breathed. Jacob called it a building with a pulse. He'd said Theodore would have been proud. The presentation was set for 10 a.m. At 9:45, I arrived, adrenaline steady, until I noticed my laptop missing. The scale models were in place, but the computer containing the entire pitch was gone. "Looking for this?" Carmichael stood in the doorway, holding it casually. "Found it in the break room." Must have been misplaced. "Right," I said dryly, taking it back. "And I'm secretly royalty." But there wasn't time to confront him. I powered it up, opened the presentation, and connected to the projector. My stomach turned. The file was corrupted. Slides scrambled, visuals missing, renders replaced by glaring error icons. "Everything all right?" Jacob asked as he ushered in the clients. I had 30 seconds to choose: panic, postpone, or adapt. Then I heard Theodore's voice in memory. "Spectacular failure is better than safe mediocrity." I smiled and shut the laptop. "Actually," I said brightly, "let's try something different." Turning to Mr. Anderson, I added, "You said you wanted a building that tells a story. Allow me to tell you that story myself." I walked to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and began sketching. My hand moved instinctively, a decade of study and quiet rebellion pouring out in confident lines. "This," I said, drawing the structure's silhouette, is a headquarters inspired by its surroundings. Every angle serves a purpose. The building interacts with the land rather than dominating it. As I spoke, the board filled with energy, flowing arrows for ventilation, curved lines for water reclamation, notes on light optimization. Traditional architecture sees buildings as static objects, I continued, adding quick details. But your headquarters will be alive, responsive, intelligent. I marked seasonal sunlight paths. In summer, smart glass dims automatically to reduce glare. In winter, it clears to welcome warmth and natural light. Anderson leaned forward, captivated. His eyes tracked every motion. Jacob quietly slid me colored markers, and I layered the sketch. Shadows, highlights, texture. The whiteboard became a living concept. A building taking form before their eyes. Theodore's lesson echoed in my mind. Architecture is communication, not perfection, but conviction. And for the first time in years, I felt utterly in command. By the time I capped the final marker 45 minutes later, the whiteboard had become a living mural of my design, layered lines, color-coded systems, and energy flowing across every surface. It was raw and unfiltered, but alive, pulsing with intent. Anderson rose from his seat, studying the board in silence before turning to me. "This," he said finally, "is exactly what I've been looking for." Someone who treats architecture as a living organism. When can you begin? After the team departed, contract in hand, I let out the breath I'd been holding. Jacob was smiling ear to ear. "That was incredible," he said. I exhaled. Someone tampered with my files. "That wasn't coincidence, I know," he admitted quietly. "Carmichael borrowed your laptop yesterday, claimed he wanted to double-check project timelines." My jaw tightened. Then he wanted me to fail. Instead, he gave me the best stage possible. Turns out I don't need slides to prove myself. The work speaks on its own. That evening, I called an emergency board meeting. Victoria sat beside me as legal counsel, her presence deliberate and composed. "I'd like to address the events of this morning," I began evenly. "My presentation files were intentionally damaged to sabotage my credibility." Carmichael shifted in his chair, feigning surprise. "That's a serious accusation." "It is," I said, "which is why IT traced the data manipulation. It originated from your workstation, yesterday at 6:47 p.m. The room went silent. A flush crept up Carmichael's neck. "I was reviewing files," he stammered. "If something was changed, it wasn't deliberate." Jacob's tone cut through the air. "Every backup was corrupted. That's not an accident." Carmichael's mask slipped. "I was testing her," he snapped. "Theodore handed this company to an unproven amateur." I laughed softly. "Testing me? Mr. Carmichael, I spent 3 months living out of a storage unit, scavenging furniture to stay alive. You think a few broken files will break me? You didn't test me. You exposed yourself." I stood, my voice calm but sharp. "Here's how this will proceed. You'll resign immediately. The company will purchase your 30% stake at market rate, and you'll sign a non-disparagement clause. If you refuse, I'll file formal complaints with full documentation, and your career will collapse under the weight of your own ego." I met his eyes. "You have until the close of business tomorrow." When the room cleared, Jacob joined me by the window overlooking the city lights. "You handled that perfectly," he said. I watched the reflection of Manhattan flicker against the glass. "Did I?" I murmured. Part of me just wanted to fire him outright. "You gave him a way out that saved face while removing the threat," Jacob said quietly. "That's real leadership. Theodore used to tell me that a great leader isn't defined by success, but by how they handle the people who try to destroy them." I turned toward him. "Jacob, why are you really helping me? You could have taken this company yourself." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Theodore asked me to guide you, yes. But that's not why I stayed. In a month you've already reshaped this place. The fellowship, how you mentor the younger architects, how you talk about design like it's alive. You've reawakened something we'd lost." He took a step closer, his voice lowering. "And when I watched you that day, drawing on the whiteboard, explaining every line with such conviction, that wasn't performance. That was someone who's been buried for years and finally remembered how to breathe." Something in his tone made my pulse quicken. This wasn't just professional admiration. "Jacob, I began, but he lifted a hand. "Don't," he said gently. "You've just come out of something toxic. You're rebuilding. I'm not going to complicate that. I only wanted you to know that I see you, the real you, and she's extraordinary." Then he turned and walked out, leaving the words lingering like warmth in the air. The next morning, Carmichael's resignation letter arrived. His shares were bought out and redistributed among trusted executives and longtime staff, the people who actually kept the company standing. My biggest internal adversary was gone, but I knew better than to think that meant smooth sailing ahead. The hardest tests were only beginning. 2 weeks later, Margaret appeared in my office holding a small, worn book wrapped in tissue. "Miss Hartfield," she said softly, "I found this tucked behind your uncle's old architectural volumes. You should read it. It's his personal journal. There are many entries about you." The pages were yellowed, filled with precise handwriting. The journal spanned 15 years, from the time I'd first come to live with him until shortly before his death. My throat tightened as I reached the section about my marriage. March 15th. 10 years ago, Sophia married Richard Foster today. I refused to go. Margaret says I'm being stubborn, maybe even cruel. Perhaps she's right, but I can't watch someone I love walk willingly into a cage. I told her he was controlling. She didn't believe me. All I can do now is wait and hope she finds her way back. December 8th. 9 years ago, heard through acquaintances that Sophia isn't working. Richard forbids it. My brilliant girl is fading into silence. I want to call her, to shake her awake. Margaret insists I shouldn't, that she must come to this realization on her own, or she'll only resent me. I hate that she's right. July 22nd, 8 years ago. Started work on the studio upstairs today. Margaret says I'm being foolish, building a space for someone who might never return, but I have to believe she will. The studio is my act of faith. April 8th, 5 years ago. Saw Sophia at a charity event. Richard's hand never left her back. He guided her every movement. She looked fragile, tired, her smile hollow. I wanted to speak to her, but she avoided my eyes. I don't think she realizes what's happening, the slow erasure of herself. January 30th, 3 years ago. Heard whispers that Richard is seeing someone else. Everyone seems to know except her. Part of me wants to tell her, but Margaret's right. Sophia needs to discover it on her own. If I interfere, she might cling to him out of pride rather than walk away. She has to be the one to choose freedom. November 11th. 2 years ago. Reviewed my will. Everything remains assigned to Sophia, provided she leads the firm for 1 year. Jacob says I'm manipulative. Maybe I am, but this company was meant for her since she was 15, sketching my blueprints with such focus I nearly forgot to breathe. She has the gift. She's simply forgotten it. September 4th. 1 year ago, the doctor says 6 months, maybe less. I've made my peace with dying, but not with the thought of Sophia living out her days, trapped in that loveless cage of a marriage. I can't save her anymore. All I can do is leave her the means to rebuild when she's ready. December 20th, 6 months ago, Sophia filed for divorce. Thank God. It will be cruel and costly, but it's her path to freedom. She's stronger than she's ever realized. March 8th. 8 weeks ago. The end is closer than I thought. The pain is sharp, but I'm content. Victoria knows what to do. She'll find Sophia and deliver the will. The rest is up to her. She'll either rise to the challenge or forge her own road. Either way, she'll finally be free. That's all I ever wanted. With love always, Theodore. I sat motionless in his study, the journal trembling in my hands. Tears blurred the ink until the words shimmered like watercolor. Every page was proof of a love that never wavered, a man who had prepared a space for me 8 years before I'd ever think to return. Margaret stood quietly nearby. "He loved you more than you'll ever know," she said. "Everything he did came from that love. He believed if he pushed too hard you'd run, so he waited and built a place for you to come home to." I pressed the journal to my chest. "I wasted so much time," I whispered. "No," Margaret said softly, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You didn't waste anything. You learned what you needed to learn, and Theodore always knew that." That night, the weight of her words followed me until I finally picked up the phone. "Jacob," I said quietly, "can you come to the estate? There's something I need to talk about." He arrived within the hour, concern etched across his face. I handed him the leather-bound journal. He read every word without speaking, his expression shifting from curiosity to deep empathy. When he finally closed it, he looked at me carefully. "How are you feeling?" "Seen," I said, "for the first time in years." Theodore understood me better than I ever understood myself. Jacob nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, he was right about you. The woman who stood in that boardroom, the one who turned disaster into brilliance, she couldn't have existed without the struggle that came before." I hesitated. "He mentioned you in there, said you'd help me, that you'd understand what he was trying to do." Jacob exhaled. "I didn't know about the journal, but yes. About a year before he died, he talked to me about you, said his brilliant niece was losing herself in a marriage that didn't deserve her, told me that when she finally broke free, she'd need someone who wouldn't control her, someone who'd stand beside her. He made me promise I'd be that person. So all this kindness," I asked softly, "is it because you feel obligated?" He shook his head. "It started that way," he admitted. "But Sophia, I stopped doing this for Theodore weeks ago. Now I'm doing it because every day I watch you become more yourself. That's not obligation, that's admiration." He hesitated, then took my hand gently. "And if I'm honest, it's more than admiration. But I know you're healing, and I won't push you. I just want you to know where I stand." I looked down at our intertwined hands, feeling something stir that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. "And what if?" I said quietly. "I want to be ready." Jacob smiled, eyes warm. "Then we'll figure it out together." No pressure, no expectations, just two architects building something new. Later, we stood on the rooftop of the estate, the city glittering beneath us. For the first time in a decade, I felt something bright and unfamiliar spreading through me, hope, not just for my career, but for my future. Theodore had given me back more than a company. He'd restored my faith in myself. He'd understood that sometimes the people who love us most have to let us fall so we can learn to rise on our own. The greatest inheritance isn't wealth or property. It's the unshakable belief that you are capable of extraordinary things. 3 months after I took over, the Hartfield Fellowship officially launched. We received over 300 applications for 12 coveted spots. Jacob and I spent endless nights reviewing portfolios, debating merits and potential. "This one," I said finally, holding up a submission that caught my breath. "Emma Rodriguez," I read aloud, holding the application between my fingers. "She's designing homeless shelters that include community gardens. She wants architecture to heal communities, not just house them." Jacob leaned closer to scan the portfolio. "She's 22, no field experience." "Neither did I when Theodore believed in me," I said. "That's exactly why she belongs here." When the 12 fellows arrived that September, I gathered them in the 5th-floor studio. Their nerves were obvious, eyes darting, hands fidgeting, but I wanted them to understand this wasn't a favor. "You're not here because of charity," I told them. "You're here because you're an investment." Theodore Hartfield believed that true innovation comes from varied perspectives. "You'll work on real projects alongside our architects. You'll be heard, challenged, and sometimes overruled, but you'll always matter." "Welcome to Hartfield Architecture Afterward," Emma approached, clutching her sketchbook like a shield. "Miss Hartfield," she said shakily, "thank you. My parents never understood why I wanted to study this. They said architecture was a nice hobby, but not a life. I smiled. Let me guess, they said it's impractical? Her laugh trembled. Exactly. People who don't understand passion always try to shrink it, I told her. My ex-husband spent 10 years insisting my degree was just a pretty waste of time. Don't ever let anyone make you small for dreaming big. The program was rigorous. 40-hour weeks assisting on firm projects, plus independent designs guided by mentors. A few senior staff grumbled about the workload, but most embraced the energy the fellows brought. By November, Emma's community shelter concept caught the eye of a Brooklyn nonprofit. They wanted Hartfield to lead the build, with Emma as the principal designer under supervision. This is too much responsibility, she told me one morning, voice shaking. You're an architect, I said simply. Act like one. The project became her trial by fire. Some critics accused us of exploiting young designers for publicity, and Architectural Digest requested an interview. The Hartfield Fellowship isn't about cheap labor, I said when asked. It's about tearing down the barriers that keep talent from thriving. Emma comes from a working-class family. She couldn't afford unpaid internships. This program ensures opportunity depends on skill, not privilege. The article ran with portraits of all 12 fellows, bright faces framed by models and sketches. Within a week, 3 other firms announced similar initiatives. You're changing the industry, Jacob said one evening as we reviewed blueprints side by side. I smiled faintly. I'm just following Theodore's example, though I can already hear him teasing me for taking a decade to figure it out. Over those months, Jacob had become more than a colleague. We moved in sync, late nights over design drafts, dinners that turned into hours of conversation. The connection between us was effortless, undeniable. But we kept it professional, until the company's holiday party in December. That afternoon, I'd been at the Brooklyn site with Emma, watching her explain her plans to a room full of contractors, her voice steady, her confidence radiant. Seeing her stand where I once couldn't, sure of her vision, filled me with a quiet pride I hadn't known I was capable of. By the time I made it to the party, I was late, hair tousled from the winter wind, cheeks flushed from the cold, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Jacob spotted me near the bar, his tie loosened, a rare, easy smile on his face. You missed the speeches, he said. Let me guess, I replied. Everyone thanked everyone, someone made a bad joke, and Melissa from accounting got drunk before dessert? He laughed. Exactly in that order. The DJ shifted to something slow and melodic. Jacob extended his hand. Dance with me? I hesitated. Crossing that line felt dangerous. But then I thought of Theodore's journal, of how he'd written about faith, rebuilding and taking risks. Maybe this was one of those moments. One dance, I said. He pulled me close, and we moved gently with the rhythm. No words, no masks, just breathing together in time. Sophia, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the music. I know we promised to keep this professional. We did, I whispered, and I know you're still healing. I am, he took a breath, but I have to say this. I'm in love with you, not falling, already there. Completely, irrevocably. I'll wait as long as you need, or I'll step back if that's what you want. But I couldn't go one more day pretending I don't feel this. My heart pounded, fear flickered, that old instinct to retreat, to protect myself. But stronger than that was the part of me Theodore had rebuilt, the one that knew life's best designs require risk. I'm terrified, I admitted. Richard made me question everything. What if I'm not ready? What if I ruin this? Then we figure it out together, Jacob said softly. I'm not Richard. I don't want to shape you. I love who you already are. The woman who stood in front of clients with nothing but a marker and changed the room. The one who built something bigger than herself. That's the woman I love. Something in me gave way, not to fear, but to trust. I leaned in and kissed him, right there, in front of half the company. It was reckless, emotional, real. When we finally broke apart, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then someone started clapping. And soon the whole team joined in, laughter breaking through the tension like light through glass. I buried my face in Jacob's shoulder, laughing too hard to stop. "Well," he murmured, grinning, "so much for keeping things professional." "Theodore always said great architecture comes from bold risks," I said. "Guess that applies to life, too. And if you've been following this story, tell me what you think happens next. Drop your predictions in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next? Nobody could have seen it coming. The relationship with Jacob changed everything, and somehow nothing at all. At the firm, I was still the CEO, the one steering projects and signing contracts. But after hours, it was just the two of us, Sophia and Jacob, learning how to exist together without masks, without fear. He never rushed me. Every hesitation I had, he met with patience. When I stumbled into old doubts, he steadied me without words. Where Richard had needed me small to feel large, Jacob seemed to grow alongside me, like we were both expanding into who we were always meant to be. One quiet January night, snow drifting against the library windows, he asked softly, "Tell me about your marriage." It had been a month since we'd made things official. I froze. "Why?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because I see it sometimes. You flinch when you succeed, like you're bracing for punishment." I need to understand what he did, so I never repeat it by accident. No one had ever asked me that before. Not like that. I hesitated, but Jacob's expression was open, unafraid of the truth. "He made me feel like everything about me was wrong," I said. "Too ambitious, too passionate, too quiet, too loud. My degree was a decoration, my designs were cute. When I was excited about my work, he called me obsessive. When I stopped sharing, he called me dull. There was no version of me that was acceptable. Jacob's voice was calm, but firm. That wasn't about you. That was about his need to keep you uncertain, so he could feel in control. I know that now," I said. "But for 10 years, I believed him." I kept shrinking, hoping I'd finally be small enough to fit into his idea of love. I gave a brittle laugh. Spoiler alert, I never was, and he cheated anyway. Jacob reached across the couch and took my hand. "Sophia, you are the most extraordinary person I've ever known. Your passion isn't too much, it's everything. The way you talk about design, how your eyes light up when you solve something, that's who you are. The day you walked into that boardroom and refused to apologize for existing, I knew you were going to change the world." Tears stung my eyes as I leaned in and kissed him, overwhelmed by how different it felt to be seen, not diminished. "I love you," I whispered. The first time those words had felt safe in years. "I'm still learning how to do this without fear, but I love you." He smiled against my forehead. "Then we'll figure it out together." That's what partners do. In February, Architectural Digest published a full feature on the firm and me. It wasn't just about the Hartfield Fellowship. It was about the journey, the woman who went from dumpster diving behind foreclosed mansions to leading one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the country. It chronicled Theodore's quiet decade of faith, the transformation of Hartfield architecture, and the rebirth of a legacy. The response was staggering. Journalists wanted interviews. Universities asked me to speak. Clients began calling, eager to work with us. And my Instagram exploded, 50,000 new followers in a single week. For the first time, I wasn't defined by what I'd lost. I was defined by what I'd built. Visibility has a price, and mine came calling one Tuesday afternoon. I was halfway through a design review when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months, Richard Foster. I should have deleted that contact long ago, maybe talked it out with a therapist, but there it was, frozen like a scar that never quite fades. I declined the call. He rang again. Then came the text. "Saw the Architectural Digest article. Impressive. We should talk." I turned my screen toward Jacob. His expression darkened instantly. "Block him," he said flatly. "I will," I answered, "but I want to see what he's after first." Another message arrived seconds later. "I made mistakes." "I see that now." Maybe we could meet for coffee. Closure? I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Closure, I repeated. He wants back in now that I'm a headline. You're not meeting him, Jacob said, voice firm. God, no, I replied, but I am going to answer. I typed slowly, deliberately. Richard, you spent 10 years convincing me I was nothing. You took everything and said no one would ever want a broke, homeless woman. You were wrong about me then, and you're irrelevant now. Don't contact me again. Send. Block delete. The silence that followed was more satisfying than I could have imagined. Jacob slipped an arm around me. How do you feel? Free, I said. He doesn't get to rewrite history. He made his choices. I've moved past them, but Richard wasn't finished. 2 days later, Emma knocked on my office door, holding up her phone. Some guy named Richard Foster messaged me on LinkedIn, said he's your ex and wanted to congratulate you. I told him I don't relay messages to my boss from strangers. Was that okay? I smiled. That was perfect. If he tries again, block him. No explanation necessary. Apparently that wasn't enough for him either. A week later, a letter arrived. Formal stationery, his lawyer's name embossed at the top. Jacob read it first, his jaw tightening. He wants a meeting to discuss potential business ventures and reconciliation. Translation, he wants you to bankroll his sinking company. Of course he does, I said dryly. He spent our marriage draining me emotionally. Now he's just moved on to financial extraction. Jacob handed me the letter like it was something toxic. What are you going to do? Let Victoria handle it. Our attorney drafted the response within the hour. Ms. Hartfield has no interest in pursuing any professional or personal relationship with Mr. Richard Foster. Any further contact will be considered harassment and met with legal action. It was short, precise, and final. That ended the letters and the calls, but not Richard's persistence. He'd stopped reaching out to me directly. Instead, he started talking about me. A former friend called one morning with the kind of warning that once would have made my stomach twist. Richard's been talking, she said. He's telling people you manipulated a dying man, that you stole the company from Theodore. Once, that might have shattered me. But instead of anger, I felt something softer. Pity. Richard was so fragile he needed to rewrite the story, to make me the villain so he could still play the victim. Let him talk, I told Jacob when I showed him the message. Anyone who knows me already knows the truth. Still, whispers have a way of traveling. Word reached Theodore's old circle, patrons, artists, colleagues. One of them, Patricia Monroe, an art dealer who'd been close to him for decades, invited me to a gallery opening. People are saying things, she said on the phone, and I'd like to hear your side. Jacob and I attended together. The exhibit featured architectural photography, glass, steel, and light, captured in ways that felt like poetry. Several pieces were of Theodore's buildings. Patricia met us at the entrance, her silver hair perfectly swept back, her tone warm and genuine. You look so much like him, she said, same spark in the eyes. I've heard the chatter, of course, questions about the will, about Theodore's state of mind. She smiled knowingly. Darling, those people are jealous. Theodore adored you. He spoke of you constantly in his last years. So proud, even when you weren't speaking. He showed me your old notebooks once, said you'd outshine him someday. By the end of the night, I'd met a dozen of Theodore's friends, each sharing their own piece of him. Stories about how he'd quietly followed my life, how he'd been preparing this transition long before I was ready to see it. Every word was another thread weaving back the truth. One architect pulled me aside before I left. Your ex is just revealing himself, he said bluntly. Theodore always said the real test of character is how people handle someone else's success. Richard's failing spectacularly. Driving home through the glitter of city lights, Jacob glanced over. Do you regret any of it? He asked. The marriage? The lost years? I thought about that for a long moment. I regret the time I gave away, I said finally. I regret believing the lies. But not the path itself. If I hadn't fallen that low, I might never have understood what it means to rise. Besides, I added with a smirk, I could have turned out unbearably arrogant without a little humility training. Jacob laughed. You're not arrogant. You're confident. There's a difference. Theodore would have loved that. He used to say false modesty was just another form of dishonesty. By spring, the Brooklyn shelter was nearly finished. Emma's design, vibrant, functional, and full of life, was being studied by city planners eager to replicate it in other boroughs. But with visibility came scrutiny. Marcus Chen, CEO of a rival firm, began whispering to the press that the Hartfield Fellowship was a publicity stunt, that we were overworking young designers, that I was riding my uncle's reputation instead of earning my own. In other words, the usual symphony of insecurity dressed up as concern. I could have stayed quiet. Jacob even suggested I should. Engaging just gives them oxygen, he warned. But I'd spent too many years letting men underestimate me, letting them define what I was capable of. I wasn't doing that anymore. When Marcus Chen published his self-congratulatory op-ed tearing down the fellowship, I wrote a response titled Building Bridges, Why Architecture Needs New Voices. I laid everything out clearly, our program's structure, the pay scale, the mentorship model, the measurable impact. Then I went further. I called out privilege. Marcus Chen inherited his firm from his father, I wrote. There's no shame in advantage, unless you use it to block others from climbing. The question isn't whether programs like the Hartfield Fellowship are exploitative, it's whether our industry has the courage to evolve beyond nepotism and start designing for the communities we claim to serve. The piece exploded, architecture schools shared it, students reposted excerpts, young designers flooded my inbox with messages of support. Marcus, meanwhile, looked exactly like what he was, a gatekeeper terrified of losing control. Theodore's old network rallied fast. Patricia published an open letter calling the fellowship a blueprint for the industry's future. Other architects echoed her. By the end of the week, Marcus's criticism had been reduced to background noise, drowned out by momentum. Then something I hadn't expected happened. A producer from a major streaming network reached out. They were developing a documentary on transformative architecture and wanted to feature the Brooklyn shelter, the fellowship, and, inevitably, me. This would be incredible exposure, our marketing director said, practically vibrating, but it also means your personal life will be part of the story. I turned to Jacob. What do you think? He smiled faintly. I think you'll follow your instincts. You always do. But make sure you decide how much of yourself you want to give. Your story's powerful, but it's yours. That night we sat together, weighing it. If I do this, I said, they'll ask about Richard, about the divorce, about why Theodore and I didn't speak. Jacob was quiet. That means talking publicly about emotional abuse, he said gently. The words hung heavy. I hadn't even thought of it that way. I don't want to give him that much space, I said finally. He already took a decade from me. But as soon as I said it, the truth landed. He wasn't the story. Theodore was. The fellowship was. My resilience was. Richard wasn't the chapter. He was the obstacle I'd already outgrown. I'll do it, I decided, but I control the narrative. They film what I choose to share. This isn't reality TV. It's architectural journalism with heart. The crew arrived in May, setting up cameras at the firm and on-site in Brooklyn. For 2 months, they captured everything, the process, the passion, the fellowship at work. At the shelter's opening ceremony, Emma stood before the crowd, her voice steady as she spoke about the design, how it wasn't just a building, but a place for renewal. When she thanked me for believing in her, my throat closed. Watching her, confident, brilliant, fearless, I felt Theodore's presence so vividly it hurt. I cried, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was pride. The documentary captured what Hartfield architecture had become: fellowship students presenting to real clients, board meetings marked by collaboration instead of ego, a culture rebuilt from trust and purpose. They interviewed Theodore's old friends, who shared stories of his patience and vision. Margaret spoke with quiet emotion about how he'd tracked my life from afar, wanting to reach out, but choosing to wait until I was ready. And yes, They asked about Richard. The interview was filmed in Theodore's studio, sunlight spilling across the drafting tables, the space humming with his memory. I chose honesty without indulgence. I was married to someone who needed me small to feel big, I said. He saw my education as competition, not partnership. The divorce wrecked me financially, but freed me emotionally. Sometimes losing everything is how you find yourself again. When the interviewer pressed for details, I just smiled. The specifics don't matter, I said. What matters is that I survived and built something beautiful from what was left. That's the only story worth telling. If Richard wanted a role in my life now, it was as a footnote, and even that felt overly generous. The network fast-tracked the documentary, releasing it in August to ride the wave of attention around the fellowship. Overnight, it became a phenomenon. Architecture students wrote to share their stories of parental pressure and self-doubt. Women thanked me for acknowledging emotional abuse without turning it into spectacle. The fellowship was flooded, over 1,000 new applications. And then, predictably, Richard called. I was at dinner with Jacob when my phone buzzed from an unknown number. On impulse, I answered, "Sophia, it's Richard." My breath caught, more from disbelief than fear. Jacob's hand found mine under the table, grounding me. "How did you even get this number?" I asked. "I saw the documentary," he snapped. "You made me look like a villain." "I didn't mention your name," I said evenly. "If you recognized yourself, that's called self-awareness." "You should try it sometime. People know it's me," he barked. "Our old neighbors. Mutual friends." "You're ruining my reputation," I laughed, quietly but sincerely. "Richard, I haven't thought about you in months. I'm not responsible for your reputation. That's the sum of your own choices. If my truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe ask yourself why. You're unbelievable," he spat. "I want a public apology. A statement saying I wasn't abusive, that the divorce was mutual." "No," I said simply. There was a long pause, the sound of his breathing sharp through the line. "Sophia," he said finally, his tone shifting to anger. "You took everything in the divorce. You mocked my career. Now you're using this sob story to rewrite history." I felt the same calm I'd had in that first board meeting months ago, the same certainty I'd fought to earn. "No, Richard," I said. "You rewrote history the day you decided my success was a threat. I don't owe you silence just because my truth embarrasses you. You spent 10 years convincing me I was nothing, and now you can't stand that I proved you wrong." He started to reply, but I ended the call, blocked the number, deleted it. This time, there was no shaking, no tears, just clarity, and an overwhelming sense of closure. I rose from the table, phone still in my hand, and walked outside into the cool night air. The city hummed around me, but my voice was steady. "I don't owe you anything, Richard. Not my silence, not my comfort, not 1 second of my time. You're a footnote in my story, and you always will be. Lose my number, lose my name, and lose any hope that I'll ever consider you relevant again." I ended the call before he could respond, then immediately dialed Victoria. "Richard just demanded a public apology," I said. "Draft a cease and desist. If he contacts me, or anyone connected to me, again, I'm pursuing legal action." Her tone was calm but proud. "Consider it handled. And Sophia, you've come a long way. I'm proud of you." When I returned to the table, Jacob was waiting with my wine and that warm, knowing smile. "You okay?" I exhaled, tension finally leaving my shoulders. "I'm perfect." He tried to make me feel small again, and I refused. That felt incredible. At the next table, a woman leaned over timidly. "I'm sorry for overhearing, but I recognized you from the documentary. Thank you for being so open about your marriage. My daughter's in something similar. I think your story might give her courage." I handed her a business card. "Have her call my office," I said. "No one should go through that alone. If she needs someone to talk to, I'll be there." When Jacob and I stepped out into the street, he wrapped an arm around me. "You're changing lives," he said softly. "Not just through buildings, through truth. That's Theodore's real legacy. He didn't just design structures, he built spaces where people could transform. His words stayed with me in the weeks that followed. By October, exactly 1 year since I'd taken over Hartfield Architecture, the firm had become stronger than ever. The board convened for a partnership vote to officially elevate Jacob from senior partner to co-CEO beside me. I expected some hesitation, maybe even politics. Instead, the approval was unanimous, followed by applause. But before we could adjourn, Patricia Stevens cleared her throat. "There's one more matter," she said, sliding a folder across the table toward me. "Sophia, the board has received an acquisition offer for Hartfield Architecture." The room seemed to still around me. "What?" "It's from Marcus Chen," she continued. "His firm is offering $300 million for a full buyout. After losing multiple clients to us, and with our 3 new international contracts, he's decided acquisition is his only viable path forward." I flipped through the pages, scanning the figures. $300 million. My personal share alone would exceed $150 million, enough to ensure financial freedom for life. Jacob's voice broke the silence, low and firm. "This is a trap. Marcus spent months trying to discredit us. Now he wants to buy what he couldn't destroy." I met his gaze, and knew he was right. "The offer's legitimate," Patricia said, her tone measured. "I suspect Marcus wants to eliminate competition and quietly absorb what makes Hartfield unique. If you sell, he'll own the name, the projects, the fellowship. He could erase everything Theodore built." I skimmed the document again, each clause confirming what I already knew. A full acquisition meant surrendering control of the company, of the vision, of the soul Theodore had poured into every blueprint. "No," I said, the word leaving no room for doubt. Patricia's brow softened. "Sophia, that's a tremendous amount of money. $300 million is life-changing. You should at least consider it." "I don't need to," I said firmly. Theodore didn't build this firm for someone like Marcus Chen to buy it and strip it for parts. He didn't spend his life proving architecture could serve humanity just for me to sell it to a man who represents everything he fought against. The answer is no. The board members exchanged glances, then, almost as one, smiled. Patricia reached for another envelope and slid it toward me. "That," she said, "is exactly what we hoped you'd say. Theodore anticipated this scenario. His will contained a sealed provision we weren't allowed to disclose until you'd been CEO for a full year and refused a major acquisition offer." I blinked. "A provision?" She nodded. "He established an additional trust, $30 million, unrestricted. His note describes it as a reward for understanding that some legacies aren't meant to be sold." For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened as the weight of it settled in. Theodore, always thinking 3 steps ahead, still teaching me lessons from beyond the grave. Jacob touched my arm. "He tested you," he said quietly. I smiled, shaking my head in disbelief. "He did. But not out of control. A year ago, I might have been angry at the manipulation. Now, I get it. He wasn't testing my obedience. He was proving my strength, showing me that I could lead, not just inherit." "How do you feel?" Jacob asked. "Like he knew me better than I knew myself," I said softly. "A year ago, I might have been tempted. But now? This company isn't just his legacy anymore. It's mine, and it's not for sale." The vote to name Jacob co-CEO passed unanimously, applause echoing through the boardroom. But as the meeting adjourned, Patricia approached me privately, her expression almost tender. "There's one more thing," she said, handing me a small velvet box. "Theodore left instructions to give this to you once you pass the acquisition test." I opened it carefully. Inside was a slender ring, silver, etched with the delicate lines of architectural blueprints. Beneath it, a folded note in Theodore's handwriting. "Sophia, if you're reading this, you've passed my final test. This ring belonged to my wife, your great-aunt Eleanor, whom you never had the chance to meet. She was an architect, too, one of the first women to practice in the 1950s. She faced barriers you can't imagine. I brushed my thumb across the ring's engraved surface, tracing the fine lines that looked like a miniature floor plan. My throat ached. I could almost hear Theodore's voice, calm, proud, a little teasing, saying, "Now you finally understand what legacy really means." But she never compromised her vision. When she died, I promised I'd give this to someone worthy of her legacy. That someone is you. Build bravely, live boldly, and never let anyone make you small again. I'm proud of you. I slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit as if it had always belonged there. Of course it did. Theodore had orchestrated everything with impossible precision, even this. That evening, I stood in the studio he'd built for me 8 years before, the Manhattan skyline glowing through the glass, Eleanor's ring catching the city's light like it had been waiting for this moment. Jacob appeared in the doorway, his voice gentle. "Penny for your thoughts?" I turned, smiling faintly. Theodore planned every piece of it, the inheritance, the board, the acquisition offer. He created obstacles like an architect builds foundations. Every test was designed to make sure I became the woman he believed I could be. Jacob moved closer. "Are you angry?" I shook my head. "No, I'm grateful. He didn't just give me a company. He gave me the challenges I needed to prove to myself that I was capable. Without them, I might have kept doubting forever." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You know what I think?" he murmured. "Theodore already knew you'd pass every test. Because you have something Marcus Chen and men like Richard never will." "What's that?" I asked quietly. "The instinct to build instead of destroy," he said, "to see potential where others see problems, to put people before profit. That's why I fell in love with you. Not because you inherited Theodore's empire, because you see the world as something worth improving." I turned in his arms, my voice barely above a whisper. "I love you too. You've been my partner in everything." He hesitated, eyes flicking with nervous light. "Speaking of partnership," he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, the ring inside glimmered, simple, elegant, timeless. "Sophia Hartfield," he said softly, "this isn't about any test or deadline. I'm asking because every single day with you is better than the one before, and I want a lifetime of those days, watching you change the world. Will you marry me?" For a moment, I could only stare, at him, at the ring, at the studio that had once been Theodore's dream and was now the center of my own life. A year ago, I'd been married to a man who needed to shrink me to feel tall. Now I was being proposed to by someone who wanted nothing more than to see me soar. "Yes," I whispered, the word breaking into a laugh and a sob all at once. "Yes, absolutely, yes." He slipped the ring on beside Eleanor's, and together they gleamed, one symbolizing legacy, the other a new beginning. Jacob grinned. "Should we tell people tonight?" "Actually," he said, pulling out his phone, "I already texted Margaret. She's chilling champagne. Said she's been waiting for this moment since the day you moved in." When we went downstairs, Margaret was radiant, 2 flutes in hand, eyes glistening. "It's about time," she said. "Mr. Theodore would be so proud." I laughed through tears. "Knowing him," I said, "he probably planned this too." "Probably has a letter somewhere about how you're perfect for me," I joked through my tears. Margaret chuckled knowingly. "Actually," she said, already heading toward Theodore's study, "he does." She returned with an envelope sealed in Theodore's familiar, precise handwriting, addressed to both of us. The date stopped me cold, just a week before he passed. Jacob unfolded it carefully, and we read together. "Jacob and Sophia, if you're reading this together, then my plan worked better than I dared to hope. Jacob, you've been like a son to me. Sophia, you've always been the daughter I never had. I couldn't imagine 2 better people to lead my company, or better partners for each other. Build something beautiful together, and please, for the love of all that is holy, don't name any children Theodore. That name dies with me. All my love, T." We both laughed and cried at once, clinking glasses of champagne in honor of the man who'd believed in us long before we believed in ourselves. Our engagement announcement spread quickly through the architectural world. Architectural Digest wanted the exclusive. Design magazines asked for photo spreads. Even Theodore's old rivals sent warm notes, admitting, grudgingly or not, that the legacy he'd left was thriving in capable hands. But predictably, the loudest reaction came from Richard. On a gray Friday morning in November, Victoria called, her tone controlled but edged with fury. "Richard just filed a lawsuit," she said. I blinked. "For what?" "He's claiming you used marital assets to invest in Hartfield architecture, that he's entitled to a share of your inheritance." I laughed out loud. "I was broke when we divorced. He took everything. How exactly does he think I invested money I didn't have?" Victoria sighed. "His argument is creative. He's alleging that your architectural education and skills, developed while he supported you financially, count as a marital asset that contributed to your current success. It's baseless, but it's designed to drag you through court and drain your resources." Jacob, listening on speaker, looked ready to put his fist through the table. "He's doing this because you're engaged," he said. "It's pure retaliation." "Exactly," Victoria agreed. "And that's why we're not just defending, we're counterattacking. I want every piece of evidence showing he sabotaged your career. Emails, texts, journal entries, anything proving he deliberately kept you from working." I went still. "I kept journals," I said slowly. "I never showed them to anyone, but I wrote everything down. The things he said about my degree, the projects he undermined, the times he hid mail or canceled meetings without telling me." Victoria's tone sharpened. "Perfect. Get them to me today. We're filing a countersuit, emotional distress, defamation, and harassment. He wanted to play games. We'll end them." That afternoon, Jacob and I drove to my old storage unit, a cold, echoing space full of boxes I hadn't opened since I left that life behind. Dust clung to the cardboard like the past refusing to let go. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Jacob asked quietly as I pried open the first box. "I need to," I said. "It's time to face it. And finish it." Inside were the notebooks, dozens of them, stacked and worn, filled with years of small handwriting, sketches, ideas, and painful honesty. Every dismissal, every manipulation, every recorded reminder of who I used to be and how far I'd come. This wasn't just evidence, it was proof that Richard's lies had already lost. As we dug through the boxes, dust thick in the air, I finally uncovered the journals. 10 years of my life stacked beneath old textbooks and sketch pads. My hands trembled as I opened one. The ink faded, but the words still sharp. "Listen to this," I said quietly, reading aloud from a page dated 5 years into my marriage. Richard told his colleague at dinner that my architecture degree was just a hobby, cute but useless. When I corrected him, he laughed and said I was too sensitive. Later, he told me I'd embarrassed him. I swallowed hard. I apologized. God, I apologized for existing. Jacob's jaw tightened as he listened. "He systematically destroyed your confidence," he said, voice low. I closed the notebook and looked at him. He tried, but he didn't succeed. I'm still standing, and he's the one desperate enough to file a lawsuit. One by one, we opened the rest. The pages were filled with quiet devastation. Richard belittling my ideas, mocking my appearance, calling me too emotional whenever I spoke with conviction. Notes about missed exams because he'd forgotten to mail my registration. About canceled interviews because he'd scheduled surprise trips. About how he'd told me, so many times, that no one else would ever love me. When Victoria reviewed the journals later that night, she flipped through the entries with grim satisfaction. "This isn't just documentation," she said. "It's a chronicle of coercive control. This will destroy his case completely within a week." She filed the countersuit, emotional distress, defamation, harassment. The response from Richard's legal team came almost immediately. They offered to withdraw his suit if we withdrew ours. "Absolutely not," I told Victoria. "He came after me out of spite." He tried to ruin my peace and my engagement. He doesn't get to walk away just because he finally realized I'm not afraid of him." Victoria nodded slowly. "You understand this will be public. Your journals, the divorce records, the abuse claims. It will all be part of the record." "Good," I said. "Let it be. I'm done protecting his reputation at the cost of my truth." The preliminary hearing was set for December. When the day came, I walked into that courtroom in a tailored suit, Jacob steady beside me, Margaret quietly supportive in the back row. My heart pounded, but not from fear, from conviction. Richard was already seated with his attorneys, looking smug and certain. That confidence didn't last long. The judge flipped through our filings, eyebrows rising higher with each page. "Mr. Foster," he said evenly, "these counterclaims are serious. Emotional abuse, financial coercion, deliberate career sabotage. Your counsel represented this as a simple property dispute." Richard's attorney stood visibly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, these accusations are exaggerated. My client supported Ms. Hartfield financially throughout their marriage." Victoria stood next, composed and lethal. "Supported her," she said, "or imprisoned her, Your Honor. We have 10 years of contemporaneous journals, corroborating correspondence, and testimony from colleagues and friends. Mr. Foster systematically prevented Ms. Hartfield from working. He sabotaged job opportunities, withheld mail, used financial dependence as leverage. This wasn't support, it was control." The courtroom went silent. Even the judge paused, studying Richard, whose smugness had vanished. Victoria continued, her tone razor sharp. "He underestimated her then, and he's underestimating her now. He thought dragging her into court would intimidate her. Instead, he handed us the platform to expose him." Richard looked down, hands clenched, as the judge spoke again. "We'll proceed to evidentiary review in January," he said. "But I'll say this now. If even half of these claims hold, this case will not end well for you, Mr. Foster." As we left the courtroom, Jacob took my hand. "You okay?" I looked at him, exhaling the breath I'd been holding for 10 years. "I'm better than okay," I said. For once he's the one answering questions. "This wasn't support," Victoria said, her voice cutting cleanly through the courtroom's hush. "This was coercion. Sustained, deliberate abuse meant to keep my client dependent." She laid out the evidence methodically, the journals, the emails, and even notes from their former marriage counselor. By the time she finished, Richard looked hollow, the confident smirk replaced by the dull panic of someone realizing he'd miscalculated everything. The judge's expression was unreadable, but his tone wasn't. "Mr. Foster," he said slowly, "these documents make it abundantly clear your lawsuit was retaliatory, not substantive. Ms. Hartfield received her inheritance after your divorce was finalized. You have no legal or financial claim. Furthermore, to argue that her education constitutes marital property when you actively prevented her from using it professionally is not only legally unsound, it's morally indefensible." Richard's attorney tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand. "Motion dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Foster, you should consider yourself fortunate that Ms. Hartfield isn't pursuing criminal harassment charges. Take this outcome as a gift, and move on with your life." Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting, exactly as I'd expected. Cameras flashed as microphones appeared in front of me. "Ms. Hartfield, how do you feel about the ruling?" "Vindicated," I said without hesitation. "My ex-husband spent 10 years convincing me I was worthless. He took everything in the divorce, and when I rebuilt my life, he tried to take that too. Today, the court confirmed what I've always known. Richard Foster is a small man who can't handle strong women, and I'm done giving him any power over my narrative." "Will you pursue further legal action?" someone shouted. "No," I said. "He's not worth my time or energy. I have buildings to design, a company to run, and a wedding to plan. Richard is irrelevant to my future, and honestly, he always was." By nightfall, the clip was everywhere. The words "small man" trended for hours. Other women came forward online, sharing their own stories of his controlling behavior. Clients dropped him. Business partners cut ties. I hadn't lifted a finger. He'd destroyed himself simply by being who he was, finally seen in full light. Later that evening, I found myself on the rooftop of the Hartfield estate, city lights flickering across the skyline. Jacob joined me, wrapping his coat around my shoulders. "How are you really feeling?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Free," I said, "completely free." "He can't reach me anymore. Not legally, not emotionally. His opinion means nothing. His existence doesn't touch my peace." Jacob studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Theodore would be proud. You turned every wound into strength. That was always his design, wasn't it? Every test, every challenge. Leading you here, I looked out at the glowing grid of Manhattan, the heartbeat of everything we'd built. He wanted me to understand that I'm not defined by the people who tried to break me," I said softly. "I'm defined by how I rebuilt." Jacob smiled. "So what now? You've conquered your demons, rebuilt the company, sparked an industry-wide shift. What does Sophia Hartfield do for an encore?" I pulled a folded sketch from my coat pocket, a design in pencil and ink, raw but full of life. "I use Theodore's final trust," I said. "All 30 million of it. A nationwide public architecture initiative. Libraries, community centers, shelters, all designed with the same dignity and creativity usually reserved for the wealthy. Spaces where ordinary people can feel seen, safe, inspired." Jacob's eyes softened as he studied the sketch. "Theodore would love that." "I know," I said, smiling toward the city, "because this time, it's not about proving anything. It's about giving back everything architecture gave me: hope, purpose, a place to stand." "Architecture that serves everyone," I said, running my fingers along the edge of the sketch. Jacob studied the drawings, brow furrowed in that thoughtful way I loved. "A nationwide initiative," he murmured. "That's ambitious. But it feels right. Theodore always said the best architecture should be democratic, that beauty and innovation shouldn't belong only to the privileged." I nodded, my heart swelling. "This is how I honor his memory while making my own mark." "Our own mark," Jacob corrected gently, smiling. "Partners, remember?" I kissed him, tears blending with laughter. Partners in everything. And the wedding took place in April, exactly 18 months after the morning I'd climbed out of that dumpster behind a foreclosed mansion, the day my life had quietly begun again. We kept the ceremony small, just 100 guests, held in the rooftop garden Theodore had designed decades earlier, a living space of light, air, and history. Emma stood beside me as maid of honor, radiant and composed. She'd finished her fellowship and was now a full-time architect at Hartfield. When I'd asked her, she cried, saying, "You changed my life. Not just my career, my whole idea of what I could become." I'd told her the truth. "You did that yourself." I just opened the door. Patricia walked me down the aisle, the family I had chosen, while Margaret clutched a handkerchief Theodore had left explicitly labeled for Sophia's wedding day. Jacob's vows were simple and perfect. "Sophia," he said, voice steady, "you taught me that real partnership isn't about competing. It's about celebrating each other's strength. You've made me a better architect and a better man. I promise to always see you, challenge you, and remind you that you're capable of the impossible." My own vows came out through tears. "Jacob, 18 months ago, I thought I was unlovable, broken. You didn't just prove me wrong. You made me realize I was never broken at all. I was just waiting for someone who saw my cracks as the places where the light comes in. Thank you for being my partner in every sense, and for loving me exactly as I am." When we danced under the string lights, surrounded by the people who had seen me rebuild my life piece by piece, I caught sight of Margaret wiping her eyes and smiling up at the sky as if Theodore were right there with us. The documentary crew, the same one that had followed my journey, filmed a short epilogue that night, the closing chapter of what would become an award-winning series about architecture, redemption, and second chances. As the evening wound down, Jacob led me upstairs to the studio. On the drafting table sat a leather portfolio I didn't recognize. "Theodore left this with Patricia," Jacob said. "He told her to give it to us on our wedding day." I opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of sketches, unbuilt designs Theodore had drawn in his later years. Community centers, schools, affordable housing projects, each one breathtaking in its simplicity and heart. A folded note lay on top, written in Theodore's unmistakable hand, "Sophia and Jacob. These are my dreams that I never had the time to realize. Now they're yours. Build them together, boldly, for the people who need proof that someone sees their worth. Architecture isn't just about creating beautiful spaces. It's about creating spaces that make beautiful lives possible. I love you both. T." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears slipping down my face, while Jacob rested a hand at the small of my back. "He planned every ending," I whispered, "just so we could start something new." Jacob smiled softly. "Then let's build it, all of it. For him, for us, for everyone who needs what Hartfield stands for." Outside, the city glittered like a constellation of possibility. Inside, we stood surrounded by blueprints of a future we were finally ready to create. One where architecture wasn't just a career, but a promise. No money, no home, no clear path forward. Just a stack of notebooks filled with designs and a stubborn belief that maybe I still had something left to offer the world. But from that nothing, I built everything. I rebuilt my career, my confidence, my life. And I did it not because I was fearless, but because I was finally willing to be seen as imperfect, to fail, to try again, to grow. The truth is, resilience isn't glamorous. It's dirty, exhausting, unphotogenic work. It's climbing out of dumpsters, literal or metaphorical, and deciding that even in the rubble, you still deserve to create beauty. So to the graduates sitting here today, if life ever dismantles your plans, don't mistake that for the end of your story. Some of the strongest foundations are laid after everything else has fallen apart. Because architecture, at its heart, isn't just about blueprints or steel beams. It's about rebuilding, about believing that what's damaged can still become something extraordinary. When I left this school, I wanted to change skylines. What I've learned is that the most meaningful thing we can change is how people feel within the spaces we create. Seen, safe, inspired, human. So build bravely, fail loudly, learn endlessly, and never let anyone convince you that your light belongs in someone else's shadow. The audience stood, applause rising like a wave that filled the hall, and for a moment, I felt the same sense of awe I'd felt years ago, standing in Theodore's studio, that quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me, clutching her cap. Her voice trembled when she said, "Miss Hartfield, I almost gave up on architecture last year. But I watched your documentary. It made me stay. It made me believe I could still build something that mattered." I smiled, seeing my younger self reflected in her wide, hopeful eyes. "Then you already have," I told her, "because believing you can build, that's where it all begins." That evening, I stood again on the rooftop of the Hartfield estate, now transformed into a public design hub for the initiative. The city glowed beneath me, alive with the buildings we'd created. Jacob came up beside me, hand finding mine. 5 years, he said softly. "Can you believe it?" I looked at him, at the skyline, at the future we were still sketching into being. "Every day," I said, "I believe it a little more." And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the city, I could almost hear Theodore's voice again, amused, proud, and full of love, whispering, "Now stop talking, Sophia, and go dance with your husband." He'd given me a blueprint for becoming whole, not the kind you draft on paper, but the kind built from courage, from learning to rebuild after collapse, from realizing that strength isn't about never breaking, it's about what you do once you've fallen apart. As the city lights shimmered across the skyline, I felt the full weight of what Theodore had left me. Not just Hartfield architecture, Not just a legacy of innovation, but a calling. He'd understood, before I ever did, that architecture was never just about structures. It was about people, about giving form to hope, about designing spaces where stories like mine could begin again. Jacob slipped an arm around me, his warmth grounding me in the present. "You know," he said softly, "Theodore didn't just plan for you to build buildings. He planned for you to build lives." I smiled, resting my head against his shoulder. "Then we'll keep building. For him. For everyone who needs proof that it's never too late to start over." Below us, the city pulsed with light, museums, shelters, schools, all born from the dream of one stubborn architect who refused to let the world decide her worth. Somewhere inside that glow was Emma, leading her own teams now. Somewhere else were students who'd once thought they weren't enough, sketching their first designs, daring to believe they could build something lasting. And here, on this rooftop garden Theodore had imagined years ago, I finally understood what his last lesson truly meant. Legacies aren't inherited, they're constructed, brick by brick, choice by choice. And mine was still rising. I took Jacob's hand, the skyline reflected in his eyes, and whispered, "Ready to build the next chapter?" He smiled. Always. Together, we looked out at the city we'd helped reshape, proof that even from the deepest ruins, beauty can rise again. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, I could almost hear Theodore's voice, warm and certain. "You finally came home, Sophia, and you built it all yourself." He'd given me the rarest kind of gift, the gift of collapse, the kind that teaches you exactly how it feels to stand on solid ground again. Theodore had known what I didn't back then, that sometimes love means stepping back, letting someone fall, trusting they'll find their way out of the wreckage stronger than before. And I had. I'd saved myself, brick by brick, truth by truth. I'd rebuilt from nothing and created a legacy that wasn't about wealth or inheritance, but about becoming the woman I was always meant to be. Below me, the city shimmered. Thousands of lights flickering like unfinished blueprints, each waiting to be filled with purpose. Tomorrow, there would be deadlines and site visits, clients and designs, the constant hum of creation that never truly stops. But tonight, I stood on Theodore's rooftop, Jacob's hand warm in mine, Eleanor's ring gleaming beside my own. And in that quiet, I finally understood the lesson my great-uncle had spent a lifetime trying to teach me. You can lose everything, your money, your reputation, your safety, even your certainty, but the power to rebuild is untouchable, and when you rise again, you don't return to who you were. You become something greater, something truer, something unstoppable. I wasn't Theodore's protégé anymore. I wasn't Richard's victim. I wasn't even just Sophia Hartfield, CEO of Hartfield Architecture. I was an architect, of buildings, yes, but also of second chances, of transformation, of the belief that every person deserves a space to grow into their fullest self. And that, I realized, was the true inheritance Theodore had left me. Not the money, not the company, but the unshakable conviction that no matter how far you fall, you can always build again. And this time, build something even more beautiful.